I have been a member of the International Association of Astronomical Artists for more than 35 years. I thought it might be interesting for people to know how I first found the IAAA in the 1980s. It was before the internet, and anything online was very rudimentary at the time. I saw the program on my local PBS station in LA that showcased the early members of the IAAA. I was used to being an artistic anomaly since college, and not many artists were space artists. Here on this program were my kindred spirits, people who saw and created artwork about outer space the way I did. I was moved to tears to see that here were my people. I decided that I needed to find them and become a member of this organization. Easier said than done in the mid-'80s. There were no search engines online, just scattered bulletin boards. It took me months to contact what seemed to be a secret society, but somehow I managed to find a phone number for Joel Huygens and finally made contact and got an application to join. I attended my first workshop in San Diego and showed my portfolio to the members, and the rest, as they say, is history. When the challenge was put out for IAAA artists to come up with space art inspired by the Moons Symphony for our 40th anniversary year in 2022, I suddenly had an idea that I was inspired to create a series of art quilts for each of the 7 movements of the symphony for each of the 7 moons. I decided to do both a full face of each moon and above the surface view, and those will be clipped together with rings. When finished with the project, there would be 14 art quilts.
How the inspiration came about to compose the Moons Symphony? Well, it was October 2017 and I was just about to finish my 10-minute piano concerto called Crossing of the Crescent Moon. And I was researching the historical significance behind crescent moons and their ancient symbolism. And about 2 hours into my research, I stumbled across an article that read 10 of the weirdest moons of our solar system. And I was utterly transfixed. And I said to myself, gosh, there are more moons I could be writing for. And I was thrilled because this was the first time I was able to learn about these dynamic moons of our outer solar system. And so when I first locked eyes on them, the first thing that came to me was these moons need music and these moons need emotion. And I instantly felt I wanted to do something to help break them free from that eternal vacuum of space. And being a film composer, I know music's powerful and persuasive qualities, and I wanted to make it my mission to give them a voice through melodic identification so more people could enjoy their stories and learn about these fascinating worlds in the far-flung regions of our solar system. And that dream has come true because 5 years later, a professional recording featuring the London Symphony Orchestra, London Voices, and conducted by the world-famous Marin Alsop has materialised. And that album is about to be released October 2022. This is my music studio and it's where I composed my piano concerto back in 2017, July to October. It took me to write that 10-minute work, and it's the same studio where the Moons Symphony music was created, which I began straight after that project towards the end of 2017. And during my musical lunar explorations, I researched moons of the outer solar system and then transferred their scientific stories into symphony and song. And I guess just like a spacecraft carrying a suite of instruments on deep space missions, I required a sophisticated suite of musical tools, I guess. And as you can see in the backdrop, the digital musical data on the monitor's screens, this became my electronic orchestra and I had to wait many, many years before the opportunity to have living, breathing musicians play the music eventually. So this synthesized score was extremely helpful for beta testing the music and the concepts on audiences at private gatherings in London from around 2018 to 2020. And the timescale of the Moons Symphony voyage, from the birth of the idea to the execution of a professional recording to then signing a record deal with Signum Classics, was almost a 5-year journey. The Moons Symphony employs the full forces of both choir and orchestra to communicate the compelling characteristics of each of these unique, fascinating and dynamic worlds. And it's a celebration of art, astronomy, astronauts and science all coming together to fuel our imaginations and to share its message of awe, hope and wonder across the planet. And the collaborative net has been cast to include the brilliant minds of NASA planetary scientists and draws upon the most recent scientific data to transport us to these exotic worlds where science drove the entire creative process. And so the first 6 moons salute the efforts of successful space missions, where scientists and engineers are brought together, unified by their passion of space exploration as they work to reach new heights of understanding of the outer solar system. And so these stories are based around the scientific data. However, the 7th movement explores the emotional data that has been returned through the hearts of astronauts after sharing their emotive accounts of seeing our planet beautiful, united and whole. This movement drives this powerful point home and offers a perspective shift as we gaze at our magnificent, breathtaking planet from the surface of our Earth moon.
For my digital work, I start with a Photoshop file consisting of multiple layers, a base layer that has a trace line so I can see where details goes, a background, middle ground, and a foreground that usually has all the fine details like lines. I work 3-dimensionally up and down through the layers to create my digital painting and keep the inspiration photo next to my work on the screen to see details and sample colors. I use a Wacom tablet with a stylus to do all my digital brushwork from fine lines to soft airbrush. When I'm satisfied with my painting, I print out a sample on paper to check it. And if okay, I take the file on a USB drive to the Service Bureau and have them output the file at full size on their large format digital printer on percale fabric.
This is Dr. Zhang Zhizha, a space physicist and a co-investigator for the Europa, Clipper and JUICE missions, where both spacecraft are due to explore the Jovian system in the late 2020s. One of my fondest memories from my in-situ conversations with Dr. Spilker and Dr. Davies during my trip to NASA JPL was the ability to sit and just bathe in their brilliance as scientists, soaking up their wisdom and gleaning insight from their experience working on these flagship missions was deeply powerful in the research phase. This is volcanologist specialist Dr. Ashley Davies from NASA JPL, and in July 2018 I was in Pasadena for the Cassini Scientists meeting for a presentation I gave them about the creative process for the Moons Symphony back then. And so we took the opportunity to meet to discuss in person Moon Io's most outstanding characteristics that sets it apart from the other moons featured in the symphony. And when this particular photo was taken, Ashley was describing to me how difficult it is to grasp the mechanism of one of the most powerful volcanoes on Io called Loki Patera. and mentioned that even the press have a really hard time trying to grasp the unique behaviour of this volcano, as there's no terrestrial style volcano to compare to its characteristics. So it was this conversation that inspired the lyrics in Io, the power of such majestic land to grasp and understand the foundering lava skin. And Dr. Davies is so enthusiastic about this moon and volcanoes generally, and we both had a blast, pun intended, about talking about the solar system's most volcanically active world.
When I get the finished fabric print, I separate the fabric from the paper backing and sandwich it together with a thin layer of batting and a back fabric, usually batik. These layers are taped down to my layout table and then are pinned together so I can work on the quilt without it separating. I remove the pins as I work on areas of the quilt. I usually start working on my art quilt from the middle out. I select a compatible color of thread for the area I'm working on and proceed to free motion quilt over the surface area of the fabric. Free motion quilting is done by using a quilting attachment on the sewing machine, having the feed dogs in the down position. When doing regular machine stitching, these are up and mechanically move the fabric through the needle, and creating stitch length by moving the fabric manually through the machine needle with my hands and controlling the speed with the foot pedal.
The third movement in the symphony, which is dedicated to Titan, is told from the perspective of an atmospheric space probe called Huygens, built by the European Space Agency that was on board NASA's Cassini spacecraft. And Cassini and Huygens arrived at Saturn on Christmas Day 2004 after an epic 7-year journey together. And Huygens dismounted from Cassini to make its way to Saturn's largest moon, Titan, because Huygens had a date with destiny. Titan's atmosphere is primarily made of nitrogen plus a small amount of methane. This dense cloud of orange frustration had previously prevented space probes from piercing through its haze to glimpse the world beneath. And on January the 14th, 2005, the day Huygens would perform his heroic assignment, which was to conquer the clouds of Titan. So armed with a heat shield, Huygens would pierce through Titan's thick orange haze with a parachute, taking photographs for 2 hours and 27 minutes as it slowly descended towards Titan's surface to reveal the secrets of this hazy world. During its descent, it communicated with Cassini, who was on standby to receive Huygens' data, and would then transmit that information to eager scientists back on Earth at Mission Control. Collectively, both space probes and spacecraft returned astonishing amounts of science, and As a composer, I had a field day deciding what features to showcase of Titan in the symphony. Ron Miller's inspirational artwork helped the creative process enormously with his digital depiction of this methane and ethane complex world, which astonishingly looks like our planet. However, methane and ethane govern the hydrological cycle on Titan, not water, and sunlight is 1,000 times less than planet Earth.
When I have finished all the thread work on an art quilt, all the loose ends of thread have to be brought to the back, tied off, and turned under the fabric with a needle for a clean look on the back. It is important to have the back as neat as the front, and I often deal with the loose threads in stages. The quilt is then trimmed and blocked by pinning down and squaring the fabric on a board, and then applying a generous amount of spray starch to the whole surface. This is left to dry for a day, and then it is trimmed to the final sides, leaving about 1/4 of an inch for the border. I then cut more of the background batik fabric into lengths of 3-inch strips for the invisible binding, the height and width of the quilt, which are pressed in half and pinned to the front. Corner squares of 4 inches are also done and pressed diagonally and pinned under the strips. These are sewn about 1/4 inch from the edge. When done, the corners are trimmed of excess fabric, so when the binding is turned to the back, the corners will come to points. The binding is then hand hemmed into place on the back, leaving the front of the quilt with a clean look.